Okay, so I'm back for this kind of series about, you know, the things that I needed to hear and think about in early grief. And today, what I really wanted to talk about was is the relationship with our children. One of the things that I noticed very early on, I wrote about it. It was this feeling like the relationship with him was like the tide of the ocean with the tide going out. So it was pulling away from him. There was this sense of, you know, having seen him and been with him, and then he died and he was gone. And every day that like the feeling of his skin, the feeling of his cheek underneath my hand was not disappearing, but the memory wasn't as potent. And so, like a huge part, I spoke about this yesterday, of the pain is the separation, right? And when we grieve, there is this rule in neuroplasticity that um, people in general are map their world for permanence. It's something that is a survival adaptation that like babies come into the world with. They're able to map their surroundings for permanence and understand like the mother is going to come back. There's this idea that the mother is going to come back. Well, as parents, or even with everybody in our lives, people who are close to us, it's like there is a neurological groove, and for parents especially, where we're scanning the world all the time, every few minutes, to make sure our children are okay. Like even if you've had the experience of a child moving out or going to college, like there's this like tentacle of the mind that goes to your child every a few times a day, where you just drop in with like, I hope they're okay, maybe I'll send them a text. It's like that you're consistently and always holding your children and family. And then all of a sudden, when there's a death, there's this break in that, like where you're scanning, but they aren't there anymore. And this causes a lot of pain. And really early on, and I spoke about this in a podcast episode, my daughter and I, and she has taught me, and I'll talk about this in another episode perhaps, she has taught me, I think, the most about grieving, because children are still animist, and they understand the world in an inspirited way. There's this way that everything, every concrete thing has an essence or a spirit in it. So, even their toys have this like spirit of aliveness, right? And so we went shopping to the store like in the first, I think, week or two after Tanner's death, and we bought stuffed animals for the purpose of having some kind of physical representation of Tanner to hug. And the one that I felt drawn to, and I am a woman who is generally led by intuition, so I like to like feel into the truth of things when I'm doing them. The stuffed animal I was drawn to was like this little plush Buddha doll, right? And it was in that moment it occurred to me, I'm an adopted person from a closed adoption, and so I don't really know any of my blood ancestors, right? It was in that moment that the realization, I mean, I think it was sort of in my field of awareness, but like it really dropped in that Tanner was my ancestor. And the way ancestors are held in different traditions across the world is they're held as like teachers, as gurus, as people or spirits or emanations that are wiser than we are. And so it was like in the next few days, my relationship with Tanner was shifting in the sense that like I was not holding him per se as his mother and doing this scanning thing where I was scanning the world to make sure he was safe. I was beginning to hold him as um like this wise ancestral being, and understanding that potentially for himself and for his soul, he was going through a process of being initiated as some kind of spirit guide or angel or whatever. I don't know what they go through. I only know like what I sort of intuit. And, Tanner had some of his own issues in this world. I have chosen to, over time, this isn't something that I came to right away, and I wouldn't think it was healthy to come to this understanding right away unless it's really dropped in for you as something that's true. I've come to understand that death was Tanner's healing, right? But I've also had this sort of sense in the beginning that, like he was taken by, the ancestors or whoever the angelic beings are on the other side, and kind of healed of all of his earthly pain, right? So I had this sense that while I was just beginning to drop in with him around this idea of an ancestor, that he was going through the process of being ancestralized in a way. One of the first kind of inquiries that sort of dropped in, by inquiry I mean question, was like, okay, I can still really feel that there is a connection to my son, an ongoing relationship, just because he isn't in form. And of course, the form and all of the potential and all of the real life attachment is something to grieve. So I don't want to negate that by saying there's still a connection, right? Like, as parents, we are supposed to be attached to our children. Like, there's that kind of Buddhist philosophy that attachments make you suffer. Well, I think that, we are supposed to be attached to our children, and anyone who tells parents of, bereaved parents that they need to let go of or move on from their child just doesn't really understand basic biology. And I don't have any plans of like letting go of Tanner at any point in my life. I mean, maybe I'll come to a place where I feel the need to do that. I'll certainly let go of stories that generate suffering if I get to a place where the attachment to him is unhealthy or impeding my ability to show up as fully human in this life. But no, I mean, our attachment stays. And I could feel this really strong multi-dimensional galactic size mother love as my love was reaching out beyond the earth's atmosphere into whatever dimension Tanner resided in. And so the inquiry became, while I was doing the grieving of the physical attachment, because we have to do that work, we can't move into like, oh, this is like people say really weird things when you're first grieving, like, oh, they're not gone, they're just in spirit, that person is still here. And it's like, well, there's paradox here. Yes, and the person is still in spirit and around and connected to us, but their physical form is gone, and all of the potential and hopes and dreams and the way that relationship made us feel in its manifested form has gone. And so there's something profound to grieve. At the same time as I'm doing this grieving work, my connection with Tanner feels like it's being reestablished in a new way, or it's like reconfiguring, right? And I'm holding this inquiry, like, how do I parent a child who is beyond the veil? And is the word parent, like in the action of parenting, is that even the right word, right? And so what happened was, so in the beginning, it was summertime. He died June 5th. We live in the Northwest on the shore of Lake Erie, and it's a really gorgeous place. Like, where we live has a lot of natural beauty. We're so fortunate. And because it was summertime, I could be outside. And so what I first noticed was there was this like need to have external validation of my connection with Tanner. So the first thing that happened for me was I kept up my walking practice. There was this feeling that Tanner or someone was pushing me to move. Like, movement was really important. And so I decided, like, I'll just continue walking. And I did this thing called like a stumble cry walk, right? And I would just sort of I was in such a bewildered state. When somebody first dies, you feel very far away from yourself. So you're sort of and I do believe that bewilderment, or that very far away from ourselves, is because some part of our soul is accompanying the other person to the other side, like on their journey, because especially when it's a child or a parent, even when we are connected via DNA, there is there is a really strong etheric connection that we always have with the person. So whether they're incarnate on this planet or not, there is a connection. So what's happening for them, kind of like that idea in quantum physics, when you separate a proton, they'll do the same thing, even if if you manipulate one of them, the other one will be affected, right? Even if they're 14 miles away from each other. So it's that kind of idea. And so I had gone on this walk, and Tanner, I'm also somebody who knows a lot about symbolism. And Tanner was born in the year of the rabbit. We live in a pretty urban area. It's an inner ring suburb of of Cleveland, of a big city. And so it's quite densely populated. It's a very cute town, very progressive, like really beautiful, walkable main street, but quite urban. And a bunny hopped out, or a rabbit hopped out onto the sidewalk and just sat there, like, which is not what bunnies do. You know, when they first of all, they don't purposely get in the path of a human, right? They're tiny and they want to stay hidden. So the fact that it jumped out into the sidewalk away from the brush that it could have been hiding it was notable. But then it stayed there for like a good minute, you know, long enough for me. I was able to like catch the gaze, like it looked me in the eye, and I felt like it, oh my gosh, this potent feeling, like this is Tanner. And it stayed there long enough for me to get my camera out and take a picture of it and text somebody. Like it just kept staying there. And and there is very strong symbolism with the rabbit or the hare, that they are um like what we call a psychopomp. They're um an animal that is able to deliver messages beyond, like, to the spirit world. And so they have a connection to the land of spirit. And the other thing that would happen quite often was that I would see deers and red-breasted robins and cardinals, which cardinals and red-breasted robins both have that exact same symbolism. The red-breasted robin is supposed to be a emanation of the Great Mother, and the cardinal is definitely, with its red color, also related to the Great Mother. But that idea of loss between worlds, right? Or not loss, but lineage between worlds and connection. There was a deer that came into our yard, which, how bizarre is that? Like I said, it's an urban area. So to have a deer just wandering around underneath a beautiful rainbow in our backyard was, again, another thing that let me know that Tanner was here, you know, like in this emanation of the deer. And the deer has, again, similar symbology. So I would look for things, you know, I'd be walking and I'd ask him to show up, and, you know, in my path there would be a white feather, right? Or one day I was looking at this picture of Tanner where he was, you know, he was a teenage boy, right? So he had like this wad of money fanned out in this picture. And I was looking at that picture, and then I go out to do my walk, which felt like it became ritualistically like my connection time with him. I went out to do this walk, and there was a dollar bill right in my path. You know, it was quite obvious. One day I really needed a sign from him. I was like in very deep despair. And I had just been talking about how Tanner was the kind of kid that would give me flowers. You know, he was kind of romantic in a sense towards me, in a very cute and innocent way. But like, you know, where my kids would like make me a clay something, or, you know, draw a card for me for Mother's Day, Tanner would do like flowers and chocolate. Wow, there was just a bird right outside, huge bird, and then it flew away. It was like perched right out my window. Anyway, sorry. So I walked outside asking for him, like, please let me see you. I'm feeling so separate from you. Like, let's have some communication. And I don't think you can see him now. I hung him upside down, but I walked outside, and there was literally, I'm not joking, a bouquet of yellow flowers um, on the sidewalk. And so that was sort of like how I was connecting with him in the beginning um, of the grieving process. And, living up north as we do, we have 4 seasons. And I was starting to get worried, like, what am I going to do? How am I going to connect to Tanner? Like, winter is really, I feel like, going to be the time when I feel his death the most. And, if you're somebody who's really versed in kind of like earth-based spirituality, we know that the 4 seasons kind of emanate the life process, whereas like spring is birth, summer is like the maiden time, the time when the child, becomes a young maiden, like, and and she, is fertile. And then there is fall where we're like in midlife, and then winter is death. And I'm like, oh wow, I'm gonna feel like a death process. Winter is also like where we have our own internal winter, where we go inward, where we hibernate, where we, have our own internal process. You can also map this cycle onto the moon, whereas like spring is like the new crescent moon. And then, summer is the waxing. Um, Fall is the culmination, like midlife, right? And then you have the waning, right? And the waning moon is that inward part, and winter is that like that that crone elderly phase to death, right? And what I found miraculously this spring was that my relationship to him had really transformed over the winter. Like, I actually didn't need to go outside anymore. Like, my relationship to him became very internal, and I was able to relate to him almost like I related to him when I was pregnant. Women, when they're pregnant, develop a really strong, um, connection to their babies, and there's communication that happens, and the bond is already beginning at that point. And so like I started to notice that the way I was relating to him was a lot like how I was relating to him when I was pregnant. If I would see a beautiful sunset, I'd be like, hey Tanner, look, here's the beautiful sunset, let's enjoy this together. And so now I feel as though I don't need or rely. I mean, those external things when they come up now are still very cool. Like, I have to say that they never go out of um fashion as far as how amazing and awesome they are to have the external validation. It's only that I don't need it in the same way that I used to. It's like that scanning of the world for Tanner is not as intense as it was. I still have it. I still definitely feel like his mom. It still astonishes me sometimes that he's even gone. It's still unbelievable to me. Um, but there is this real sense that he's moved into like his new home, kind of cocooned in my heart, and I feel this almost constant connection to him. And so for people who are newly grieving, I wanted to offer some encouragement and some hope that there that the relationship with your lost loved one, it will continue. And this is just my journey with that question, that inquiry that's traveled with me all year. Like, how do I be the mother of a child who lives beyond the veil? And however this journey is going to look for you is how it will look. But there is definitely, if we're able to kind of like tune into, and it asks us, I know in our day and age, and especially having moved through COVID, and everybody's very interested in the truth, and we've sort of gotten to a place in our collective where we denigrate the imagination and we denigrate fantasy. But we need to understand that, you know, illusion, imagination, and fantasy are necessary, right? They're necessary for the world we live in. We would never have any art, good stories, no television shows that we love to tune into. We even need imagination to defend our country. Like, if we lack the imagination to um, fantasize about how our country might be attacked, right? We wouldn't have proper defenses. It's so integral to being human and being alive. Fantasy is. And so it is sort of like tapping into that part of us that is intuitive, that knows things, right? Like without needing to have a scientific study to know it or to have a scientific process. It's like it's the part of us that just knows. And so opening up our channels of intuition and practicing and just allowing and giving a lot of permission to kind of our imagination and that realm of sort of fantasy, and give, like I said, approving of the fact that, you know, you may be in some kind of imaginary realm, but that inside of the imagination form manifests. And so giving yourself a lot of permission and approval to spend time in those realms to strengthen and enhance your connection to your lost loved one, and to really understand that, you know, that is part of the healing process. It's part of how we cope, and there's nothing at all wrong with that. And so this has just been kind of, I want to make these sort of brief so that, you know, you can listen to it and then go away from this and just let it kind of percolate in your field. This idea of, you know, how is this question being manifested within me? And it's what we do is we travel with the question and the answers come to us. So it is within holding the inquiry that the question, the answers naturally arise for us. And so it may look different for you. That's totally fine. It's going to look different for all of us. The journey that we have with the loved one that we lost, the gifts they're going to give us, the way they're seeding their legacy within us is going to be different for each of us. So how it looked for me is not how it has to look for you, but just opening to the realm of possibility that there is a connection that's still there. It's just a matter of whether or not we want to tap into it, and how we open to that thing. And again, I'm always available for questions. I like to say this is yeah, you can find me on my website. You can find me on social media. I'm happy if you have like follow-up questions to any of these transmissions. I've already had some other people writing to me, um, thanking me for, you know, like how valuable this feels for them. So please don't hesitate to bring forward your questions, to bring forward your lost loved one. If you want to communicate about your lost loved one, I am always here and open to talk with you about that. Okay. Have a good one. Until next time.